Robert, thank you for making time.
This is great.
My fellow Van Zanthropologist. Robert, I wanted to ask you so many questions about your book. When did you start this journey? And well, first I'll ask you how you got interested in Stevie and all that, which I think I know the answer to. But how long did it take you to work on this book, which is the most well researched? I mean, it's unbelievable amount of information that I got in here.
Uh, well, in a way, I've been working on it my whole life because, like you, I've been a huge fan, for years and years. Um, one of the things that I really appreciate is kind of our shared journey in this, because for people who don't know, and most people wouldn't know, in 1984, you and I were both 16 years old and big Little Steven fans. So then to go 40 years later in the future, here we go, one guy documenting Stephen's life in a amazing HBO documentary, and one guy documenting Stephen's life and career in a new book. And it's just weird that those two things happened near the same time, and we didn't really know each other until right at the end of both projects.
That is pretty freaky. And I wish I could take credit for it by myself. Mine is really with Robert Cotto and David Fisher, who Robert and I made this movie, staying up all those late nights. The reason the music is so good is Robbie's late nights working on it, and Dave flying around and shooting all the interviews, and both of them bringing all that to bear. But as far as the impetus of starting it, you and I both fell in love with this music at exactly the same time. I'm 57.
Same.
You're a youthful looking man. You are. Man, you got your Stevie T-shirt. I didn't bring mine. I'm traveling. I'm in LA, so I didn't,
Right.
all I packed was like, I'm gonna reread this on the way. Didn't
That's
bring
all
any
you
John
need.
D. McDonald. Just brought this.
Right.
Um,
So anyway, so yeah, so in a way I've been working on it my whole life. I've been just always collecting information about him and collecting live recordings and bootlegs and TV appearances. For a long time it was tough to find any information on the guy. And then as he kind of got into Sopranos and stuff, he gets a little bit more mainstream, but I really in terms of a book project started working on it probably 4 years ago. And luckily, the
Around 2020.
yeah, I guess that's right. Um, yeah, probably. And luckily, already had a lot of raw data. Like I got this filing cabinet here full of just like 20, like I think like 30 years ago or something. I went through every Little Steven bootleg that I had, and I wrote a little mini review of just what were the highlights of that show. Were there any special guests, any rare songs? So I have all that stuff, and I have like every like Rolling Stone magazine review or Spin magazine or Cream, all that stuff in a giant binder. So I already had so much raw detail that it wasn't that difficult to start putting it all into some shape. And of course, I revisited everything, had to re-listen to everything. And then once I got kind of the skeleton of it put together and the format, then I start talking to people. And so once I start talking to some of the horn guys and some of the guys from different lineups of the band, and you start putting all those quotes in there, and that changed the whole flavor of the book. And then I did my first interview with Stevie, and I think we talked for like 2.5 hours. And I just asked him, I warned him at the beginning, like, I'm going to ask you stuff you've never been asked before. So once I dropped those quotes in the appropriate chapters, that really changed the feel of the book. Like that was just a game changer. And then, I hadn't talked to Arthur Baker at that point. So and he really pushed me to do that. So once I talked to Arthur Baker, then you get him almost there's a neat thing that happens a few times in the book. And one of the times it happens is in the Sun City chapter, where it almost reads like Stephen and Arthur Baker are talking to each other. They're not. They're not together.
It does read that way.
But the way that I structured it, because once I had the transcripts of my interviews with both of them, I was able to put the in a certain order that, you know, like there's one part where Arthur says, "Well, Steven's gonna have to tell you about that." And then I pick it up where Steven says, "Well, here's what happened with that." And so it seems like so so that added another level to it. And then I did a follow-up interview with Steven, which he was like, "What's left?" He goes, "You asked me everything that anyone could ever know." And I said, "No, there's more." So once I did that follow-up with him and added those quotes, I was like, "Okay, I think we have something real special here." And I'm real proud of it for having all of those moving parts in there.
I love that. When I was reading, that's kind of very unique structure in a book. And I used to do that. I did something similar years ago. I was a magazine writer. I started out in publishing. And I would do these things where I'd be doing a review. And then if I happened to have an interview with that person, but I didn't feel the whole interview was meritorious of whatever, I just do the review and then like a little quote or something. And then when I saw you do that in the book, I'm like, wow, I've always loved this. And you don't see that kind of writing a lot. So you'll be reading and you're into this great information, but then here come the experts to tell you their take on it, and sometimes to dispel what each other is saying, and sometimes to expand upon it. And I thought that was a really unique way to present all this tremendous research that went into this.
Now there's a
Yeah, I
neat part.
love that.
There's a neat part in May 1983 where the Disciples of Soul play the US Festival. It's the biggest concert they ever did. Like 800,000 people or something. This huge thing. And I talked to like I don't know, like 8 or 9 different people in the band about that. So you get Zoe, and you get Monty Louis Ellison and Mark Pender, and it just goes down the list. Jean Beauvoir, all these people remember this really important big show. It was also the last show with the horn section. Um, so yeah, they contradict each other like a little bit, but not too much. And they all, reading all those things in order, I think is really neat because these are people who don't really get to talk about this stuff too often. And I think one area where our two projects really complement each other is that you've got because it's a big HBO production, so you've got Bono and Peter Gabriel and Jackson Brown. All these people are really important in Stephen's life. And in my book, I've got Jean Beauvoir and like Rusty Cloud. Like
Yeah.
I had to have Rusty Cloud in the book. Stan Harrison, Eddie Mannion. I interviewed every member of the 1989 Revolution band who, that's a very small blip in Stephen's career. Although I will say I was really impressed when I saw the film that there's quite a bit of footage of the 89 band in there.
That was footage that we got from David Peck at Reelin' in the Years, if you know that
Yeah,
and I didn't know it existed. And I wasn't familiar with Revolution, as you know, it wasn't released in the States.
right.
I never got a copy of it. And of course, I was a hardcore fan, which we got. I want to talk to you about your fandom and how it began and all that. But the only copy I ever had of Revolution was I managed a video store, and it was attached to a record store. And that guy came in, a French guy, and we started talking about music. What do you like? What do I like? I like Little Steven, but you can't get his records here. He goes, I have Revolution. So the customer, he came back. He brought me his CD. I burned the CD. I made photocopies, black and white photocopies of the liner notes and the lyrics and stuff. That's the only way I had Revolution. So I didn't, ever have access to any of that. And when I saw that David Peck had this footage of this amazing show, that he actually references in the movie, I was crazy about it. And I love that album, and I come to appreciate it even more after reading your book.
Mm.
Your review of that album and then the reviews that you quote, I think open it up even more. And I got more. I was just listening to it this weekend.
Oh,
I was
nice.
like, yo, this is a killer album. I always liked it, but now I love it.
Right. Great.
Yeah. I mean, and even though it was on HBO, it wound up on HBO, but we financed it ourselves. Not
Right.
ourselves, but we went out and we raised money and we did it that way. And I had been trying to get him to give me permission for a long time which I'll tell you that story. When did you first contact Stevie in the process of writing your book? When did he get or find out about it and so forth? Did you start with the band members? How did you do that?
Well, I tried to get as much of the meat of the project done before I start talking to too many people, because as I'm writing the book, uh, other questions could come up. Like when I first started the book and I would tell people about it, it's like the first thing they would ask me, "Have you interviewed Steven yet?" I go, "No, that's like 2 years out, because I got to get, if I haven't gotten to the Revolution chapter yet, I don't know what questions might come up that I would need to ask them." So as
Right
I'm
on.
writing the book, I am keeping a list of questions. I am I have a separate kind of notebook or something where I'm thinking of questions. Okay, well, I got to ask Zoe about that, and I have a page for each person. I just keep adding to it. So my thing with Steven, I think he knew about it, but I pitched it to him backstage in Red Bank, New Jersey, at the Count Basie Theater, which you were at that show
I
too.
was at that show with Rob, and Ryan
Um,
Shelley was shooting it.
right. So I flew down for that, and I didn't know I was going to get an opportunity necessarily to see him. So I was there the second night, and after the show, I was with him just for a few minutes, and I pitched it to him, and right away he just said, "So what do you need from me?"
Sounds like Steve.
And that was it. We were off and running. So I still had a bunch of work to do. So I think that was in April of that year. So then I think my first interview with him was in January, and then the follow-up was like a month later or so. But I just that was the main thing, because I thought if I can't get him on board, I still have a book here. I still have I s- Most of the people I had talked to before I spoke to him. There was only a couple people who were, and I understand this, they were kind of standoffish unless they know for sure that Steven approves. And they'd be like, "Well, I can't really talk about that." So when I got back to Toronto from Red Bank, right away, any of those people who were a little standoffish, I sent them the picture of me and Steven backstage, and I said, "He's in."
Love it.
And immediately those walls came down. So in fact, one of the guys, it's not speaking out of school. One of the guys who kept reminding me for like a year or two, "I can't talk to you until Steven says it's okay," was Kingfish.
I knew it was going to be Eddie. I knew it was going to be Eddie, man.
And he even reached out to me at one point. He wanted me to write a record review of his new album. And he said, "If you could do this, it'd be really great. But by the way, I can't talk to you." And I said, "Okay, okay." So I wrote a review for his album, and he published it on his website and stuff. It was all good. And but he was always so, and there's other people too, but his thing was just a little funny
He's a soldier,
in
Marine,
that.
Eddie
Sure.
Mannion.
So he kept saying like, "No, unless Steven's okay, I can't talk to you." So after the Red Bank, like right after the Red Bank show, I go back to my hotel, and I'm just wired like crazy. So I go to the hotel bar, and Eddie walks in, and I said, "Hey Eddie, Steven's on board." And I show him the photo. He goes, "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" Like immediately, immediately. And ever since then, like then Eddie and I were trading like, emails for the next like 3 weeks, and he's answering everything that I'm asking that he can remember. So so even if Steven wasn't going to be on board, I still had a really what I felt was a pretty strong book. Uh, but then yeah, him coming on board, that just added like another like four or five people maybe who were just watching from the sidelines to see if it was cool. And then Steven gave so much. So like I said, our first interview, I think was 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Well, it's all in there. It's just
And then the
that's
second interview was like 90 minutes or something. Like or almost 2 hours. Like it was incredible. Like, and I'm glad that we broke it up, because it was only after going through the first one and going through all those questions and everything he said that brought up then some new things that I hadn't thought about before. And when he pushed me to talk to Arthur Baker, that brought up some new things about Sun City. So it just kept building on top of each other until we got to a point where it wasn't just that I could look at the project and say, okay, I have a book here. I could actually say, I think this is really good. Like I'm really happy with it. This tells a story that is not really being told. Um, and in that level, like some of the guys that I talk to, it's kind of funny, like say like maybe like a Rusty Cloud or like Nelson Bogart, trumpet player in the original Disciples. Guys like that are like, you want to talk to me? Like nobody ever wants to talk to me. I'm like, that's why I want to talk to you. That's
That really
why.
comes across. If you're a fanatic record collector like myself, or a completist, or you have that kind of brain that you need to know, and even if you don't, it's pretty fascinating because some of those guys have the best stories, and you as a writer know what to mine from all
Right.
these characters. It's never the main guy that you think that guy's gonna be boring. It's always that's why I loved hearing from the Revolution band.
Yeah.
That's why I loved hearing from guys like you just mentioned. It's really, really a fascinating job. When did you first, like the first time I heard of him, I was like you, same age. I heard about him through this local critic. You probably heard me talk about him, John Marlowe, who would sing his praises all the time. I went out and bought, I think I either got Men Without Women first, and then right after I got Voice of America, or I got Voice of America and then went back and got Men Without Women. I don't remember exactly. I would probably say that I got Men Without Women first, but right away I was like, wow, this is crazy. I've never heard anything like this, as Chris Columbus says in our movie. And then going back and listening to Southside and stuff like that. So I've been trying to get him to give me permission forever. First in 2006. I was working at this ad agency, and the guy that ran it, Chris Romero, wanted to license T-shirts from Outlaw Country.
Mm.
So I went and tried to do some research on Outlaw Country and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, Steve Van Zandt, wow, he's involved in this? At that point, wow. And then I saw Nicole Barcelona. I recognized her name from the albums. I said, are you related to Frank Barcelona? Yes, I am. You work for Steve Van? Yes, I do. Oh, my God. Do you think? And I sent a big proposal. No, thank you. Then I tried again through Jim Allen of the Hard Rock, who's in our movie. My buddy's one of the lobbyists for the Hard Rock. Tried through Jim. No, thank you. Word came back. We're aware of you. We're not interested. And I kept trying then through my friend Debbie Ohanian, who knew him. And he just kept saying, no, thank you. And then finally through Maureen, I got to be correspond with Maureen. And then I got he finally acquiesced to have a meeting in New York. So we went to this meeting over a glass of wine. It was supposed to last, a glass of wine. And 2 bottles later, we were there still hanging out and talking. He was like, all right. And then it's funny. He says very casually, I'm producing a show for Eddie Brigati. If you're around tomorrow, come by. Which I didn't know that was like a real invite. I felt like an obligation kind of an invite. I didn't know he was really inviting me. And then there was like a cabaret show for Eddie Brigati, and he wrote a song for Ed to sing there that is so beautiful. I don't know if you've heard it. It's almost like Stevie is singing about himself. Eddie told me that he's like, I think that song's really about Steve. But it does apply to Eddie, too. It's about how you want to meet yourself. It's in that same vein of like maybe Soulfire, or one of those kinds of songs where you're kind of trying to dig deep and see what's inside of you. Anyway, so he kind of gave me that half invite. I didn't know that was like an invite. And so the next night I was hanging out and I was telling Rob about it. He and I had been on a podcast. He said, if you move forward with the Steve movie, I'd love to work on it. I said, yeah, man, if it happens, I'm coming out here to meet him. I don't know. So we're hanging out at the Whiskey Lounge with our friend Bill Scurry, who did sound on the movie. And that was an AP on it. We're smoking cigars, we're drinking whiskey. And I get this text from Steve and it says, hey, I thought you were coming tonight. Oh, well, I guess it's just another missed opportunity. And I'm like, oh, shit, I messed it up. Rob, look, he sent me this text. And he goes, what? Let's go. And he threw me in a cab. He had his like New Yorker skills up, threw me in a cab. He hailed a cab in 1 second. We zipped over to the Knitting Factory, or the other place that sounds like the Knitting Factory. We should know it because we're these guys. We can't not know it. Do you know that other venue in New York sounds like the Knitting Factory? It's the Cutting Room. Is it the Cutting Room? I don't know if Knitting Factory's closed anyway. We zipped over there. Ed was about to go on. His eyes lit up. He goes, "You made it!" And like he was like, I was like, "Yeah, man, I didn't know it was a real invite." He's like, "You're not Italian, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "That was a real invite." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know." So we sit down with them. We watch the show, and we had missed, I think, a little bit of the show. I said, "I'll be back in 2 weeks to watch the whole show," and I came back 2 or 3 weeks later to watch the whole show from the beginning. And we sat together. I'm still in the romancing stage. At one point, I went all the way to Wisconsin to meet with him after a show. There was another director that wanted to make a film about Steve, and I kind of had to like duke it out with the other director a little bit and kind of each make our play. And but finally, I got the okay, and then we were off to the races. And then Rob and Dave raised some money, and we had these great EPs on board, and then we shot the movie, and we stopped in 2019. We finished principal photography, and at that point, you talk about Steve last. Steve didn't even want to be in it. He wasn't going to be in it. Just do it with file footage he wanted, and B-roll and old footage. And then the pandemic hit, and then we spent all this time cutting and recutting, and we wanted to make a 3-parter, and then cutting it down, and then finally HBO got involved, and then we were on that journey. But that's my story. But so how did you first hear about his music in the first place, or even get interested in him or find out who he was or anything like that?
The very first, like in the early '80s, was when I got into Bruce and the E Street Band, and people were telling me like, "Oh, his guitar player's coming to town," but I was pretty young, so I didn't really. And he was playing a club that I wouldn't be able to get into anyway, so it didn't make too much of an impact on me. So the Disciples played 2 nights in Toronto in February of '83. So that's actually technically the second lineup of the Disciples of Soul. I always make a distinction between '82 and '83.
Yeah, it's true.
Um, very different. But so one of the shows was broadcast on radio, and he was also interviewed on a Toronto kind of music magazine show called The New Music. So I watched the interview with him, and at the end of it, they played the video for Forever, and it just knocked me out. Even as a kid, I was a really big Motown fan, big Smokey Robinson fan. I was like, this is Tears of a Clown,
Yeah.
but like sung by Keith Richards or something. So
Or
I went out literally the next day. So that would be like the second or third week of February '83. I went out the next day, whenever that show was broadcast. I think it was only on Saturday nights, and I bought Men Without Women, and that was it for me. I was like in deep. The following summer in '84, that's when Voice of America came out. Second night of the tour was Toronto. So I met Steven before the show, and right at the front of the stage, actually right between him and Beauvoir, for the whole show, and then met them again after for a little bit. And only got a couple of photos. Didn't get a photo of me with him. If I had a picture of me with him in '84, I would have put that in the book, because that would have been incredible. But I got him to sign some stuff, and um, so after that, it was like really intense. And I was just like, from seeing him outside the venue before and after, and seeing the show, and then after that, I was just like, forget about it. Like, you know, trading bootlegs of Rock Palace, and getting just nuts, going straight on nuts for him.
Me too. I remember getting Men Without Women and looking at that the like the it's not the jacket. It's like the what do you call those? The liner notes that come out and they
Like
fold out, but they're not where the record is.
the lyric sheet.
I guess the lyric sheet. It was a color, you know, big oversized lyric sheet with those photos from the Men Without Women movie, and I was like, what is this? Like, who are these cool looking people? There was a girl in the
Yeah,
band. Beauvoir looked
yeah,
so cool with the
yeah.
mohawk, those dusters. Um, his conga player. Everybody looked so dope. And then the music was like, wow. I was also a big Motown fan. I had the vinyl Motown box set with was it 4 or 5 records,
Right.
LPs. So I was heavy into Motown. So I felt like I knew the references. But then with rock and roll guitars, to me, it sounded like Bob. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
And just the lyrics and the romantic nature of the
Right.
lyrics. I feel like those are some of the most romantic songs I'd ever heard. You could tell he was in love, you know. That
Right.
was one of the coolest things about making the movie. People are like, "Oh, the movie's so good. The movie's so good." I'm like, "Well, you got the guy, you got the girl, you're interviewing them both. They made a movie of them falling in love that I can pull from, and they
Yeah.
made a record about falling in love.
Yeah.
So how do you mess that up, really?
Right.
You know
Right.
what I mean? It was mine to mess up because it's all there.
Right.
But that really came across for me. And then the local writer, Vote is after Voice of America, the Vote 45.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we did Voice of America. That blew my mind. And it didn't hurt that every time I'd read an interview with Bruce, he's like, "It's one of the greatest albums I've ever heard. It's one of the greatest albums I've ever heard." And I certainly felt that way. I still feel that way. I mean, that album's perfect.
I think for me, probably after 84, that's when I went backwards and got the Southside Johnny albums.
Me too.
And so then when I learned about those, and then I learned about the two Gary U.S. Bonds albums. So at that, and I was already like, I love the river so much, but then I'm seeing how these other things fit into that. So, and actually, this is kind of neat, I thought. So at the time, I go, well, you got the river with the E Street Band, then you got these Bonds albums, also with the E Street Band, but with horns from the Jukes albums. And then, so Men Without Women is just all of that coming together.
Yeah, man.
All of those elements, the production style of the river, plus the horns guys from here and this. And it was only when I started researching the book that I realized a lot of these records were recorded in the same studio. So, and that was something that was important for me to break down because Steven always just kind of shorthands it and says, "Oh, Men Without Women was recorded live in one day," which I get it. That's shorthand for him. So it's obviously not true. So I really enjoyed trying to break it down because I never really knew before. Well, when were those Bonds records recorded? And then the more that I find out that the first set of Men Without Women sessions were like way earlier, and then he had to stop to do the first Bonds album, and then to finish up River sessions, and then go back to Men Without Women, and then do some more, the second Bond album. I had a whole chart written out just figuring out, and they're all like Hit Factory, Record Plant, this one, and how they all intertwined. And sometimes I need a visual like that in front of me, almost like a family tree, where I can just plot where everything, you know, in what actual sequential order it happened. Because even though I'm going to write about Men Without Women as its own chapter, the Bond stuff kind of overlaps. So if I'm going to talk about them later, I still need to, in that chapter, be able to mention when it happened. And since it happens again from 82 to 84 when Bruce is in the studio for like 2.5 years doing Born USA. Got to break it down and see like, okay, but when did this happen? There's all these side shoots that was really important for me to get right.
And because this is it. This is you are the keeper of the history. You know what I mean? So, and Steve's gonna watch this, of course. I bet. Um, when you tell him like, "Hey, what about these dates?" So wait a minute, man. You may not be remembering this. Don't you think it could be this? What was his reaction?
Well, first of all, I will say, Bill, that I feel really strongly about this. I never kind of am shocked or feel bad about like a 70-year-old musician who doesn't remember the minutia of his career from 50 years ago. I never, would ever try to, make anyone feel bad about that,
No, not
like,
that.
or anything like that. So, like, there's a lot of things about my life I don't remember, and it's really not that interesting. So, like, I have not been flying all around the world for the last 40 years in front of, stages and huge crowds and stuff like that. So, I never chagrin or have any. So, I'm just always happy if there's anything that they do remember. And, you know, uh, so I almost expect when I have my list of questions, like, oh, there's no way. I'm still gonna ask it just to see. But um, so there were some things like the good thing about Steven because he deals in honesty and he deals in truth, which is really important to me, and it's an important part of Buddhism. That if you didn't remember, he'll just say, "No, I don't know. I have no idea." Which is way better than just like making shit up. Because then I got to call him on it, or I got to. And there were a few times where I'd say, "Well, no, that was actually a little bit later." I got a great clip, and I've posted it before. I just think it's a lot of fun, where he says, "What was the B side to the single of Solidarity?" And I say, "Live version of Under the Gun, 1983 at the US Festival."
I've seen that clip.
And he goes, all right, cool. All right. He's like, all right, if you say so.
Yeah, no, that is pretty trippy. I've seen that. I always like the mystery of it. I always like, I
Sure.
mean, I like to know, but I like when rock and rollers, for whatever reason, I like them with a little mystery
Sure.
to it. And Stevie certainly has that, which he may have,
Right.
borrowed from Question Mark and the Mysterians, and also Bob Dylan, and also who the hell else knows,
Yeah.
somebody else. Um, that's always cool. And so, there were things that I found out reading your book that I had just no idea. Like I didn't know about who's the guy that does the rap. Is Stevie as what's the name of that character that does the rap on Vote?
Oh, oh, and the Vote remix?
Yeah,
Oh, Cobra Jones.
yeah, man. I'm like, what? So that was totally surprising.
Yeah,
And there
it's
was so
actually
many.
him.
Yeah,
It's
there was
actually,
so many things because he couldn't get Melly Mel. He wanted Melly Mel to do it, right?
yeah.
So there's so many interesting things like that blew my mind. What was the most sort of surprising thing that you learned when you were writing this?
In terms of his career, I guess what was really eye-opening to me the most, and I've talked to him about this, is how many people from his past, how fondly they look back on working with him. Like those guys from the '89 band, they love him like
That
deeply.
came across.
And they weren't with him for all that long. They're not like Mannion, who's been around for like over 40 years with them. Obviously, yeah, there's a huge respect there. I mean, like I said, Mannion wouldn't even talk to me unless Steven gives it the okay. But like the '89 guys, or like some of the stuff Rusty Cloud told me about the Better Days sessions, like these people look back and they're just really, really favorable. They just love their time with him, no matter how, they talk about like, well, Steven came in and he changed my life because he taught me, about doing background vocals or about this, or he just knew what he wanted. And even though he has such a mild kind of no drama kind of way that he carries himself, all these people after all these years still have such respect for him. So I already had the title Solidarity Forever for a really long time, but I was open to change if I had to, or if something better came up. But after talking to these guys, I thought Solidarity Forever, that's what this is. Like this is a family that he's been building over the years, and like very few people get taken out of the family. There's a couple, but for the most part, you're just building and building and like adding. So now you got like Jesse Wagner and
He's
like
amazing.
Banana,
Yeah,
like all these new people have been they just add more to the family, add more to the family. So that was a really nice and kind of wonderful thing to hear from all these uh I'm talking to band members from 1982 Disciples. I'm talking to current 2019, 2017 Disciples. 2000, Pat Thrall from '87.
great guy.
So all these people, Pat Thrall like sang the Lost Boys song "Affection" to me over the phone.
That's so cool. That's one of my favorite songs. I wanted to release that album so bad.
Oh yeah, I talked to him about it too, and that was an important album. I really wanted to get a lot on because that era is really tough. So between Born Again Savage and the Lost Boys, that's a real tough area. And luckily, Zoe remembered a lot because those sessions were like done in her apartment. But Steven's guitar tech, who's become a very close friend of mine, Ben
Ben
Newberry.
Newberry, great guy.
So
I mean, I don't know him, but seems like a great guy.
he remembered tons of stuff. So he'd be giving me lots of info about Steven's gear and the little 4 tracks that they were using. So that was an important area to build stuff up from as well. But what I was saying, to get all these, like Zoe and Ben used to live together,
Oh, I know.
and they haven't been together for like a really long time. But even them, they're like both sharing each other's stories,
Very
and
fond of each other. Very sweet.
yeah. So I
It
had
is.
dinner.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Robert. I'm sorry. No, please.
Well, I'm just saying, like it made the title Solidarity Forever more than just two kind of cool song titles that when you say them together, they just sound good on the tongue. It actually, I was like, wow, there's a theme kind of going through this book that I wasn't really planning or aware of. I think I'm just talking about this, there's like this record and this record and this record, but no, there's actually like this kind of family thing that you get through it when you have quotes from Eddie Mannion back in 82 and 83, and now he reappears now in 2017 and he's got a little something to say. Like you don't stay with somebody for over 40 years if it's not a real healthy situation.
Yeah, that came across in my interviews too. It's not like I cherry picked and did. If somebody would have something nasty to say, it would have made the movie more interesting. We talked to 52 people, maybe 53, and everybody was just like, "This is a great dude. This is a great dude." And you see it; it comes across. Like who's when Zoe's character is introduced, that could be, oh man, what's gonna? It's the greatest. They're great friends. When Darlene, like just friends. Like he seems like he really understands what Sinatra would call paldom.
Yeah,
Being a friend
right.
and a real friend. And I get a little choked up because it's just amazing to be around such positivity and someone who's just like you said, honest, straight, direct. Um, man, I just, what an experience. And just to have a little bit of that sort of uncompromising genius to be around that was like, wow, it's kind of inspirational.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
even just in the way he approaches his relationships, I tell them all the time. When I watch him sing to Maureen, Summer of Sorcery at
Mm.
the end of the night, and I would be like, wow, I'm the worst. I'm a terrible freaking mate and partner. This guy's a stud. This is the way you do it. This is the way you hold on to love and you make it. It's a lot to be learned. It's not just like, oh, he's got some interesting things to say politically. He's a very interesting cat in a lot of facets. He's a very balanced, cool dude. So I just feel lucky to have been sort of near that energy. And you hope that but whether it's the work ethic or the non-compromising thing, that was the coolest, to see somebody that really doesn't give a shit. This is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
This is my vision, and I don't care if two people like it. This is how I want it. Which I had just done a movie about Peter Bogdanovich, who's very much like that as well. So it's like, wow, there are people that just don't, and I aspire to that, but I'm just a mortal. So being around people that don't compromise and just know their vision and what they want, that's a gift.
I was I was backstage with Steven at an E Street Band show in like 2000 or 2001. Um and they just done a reissue of The Voice of America on CD. And in the liner notes, he kind of talked about like throwing his life away and, putting an album of politics instead of being concerned with commercial, and I left the band and I threw it all away or whatever. So we were backstage and I had the CD with him. And I said, Steven, in here, you talk about like putting out this record was like a mistake or something. And I got to tell you, this record is not a mistake. This record is like real. This is heavy. Like when this thing came out in '84, I didn't know about issues in like
Me
South
either.
America and and then stuff like that. I said, this is like really important stuff. And I was glad I was able to say that to him. That was like 25 years ago. I was able to say that. I felt it back then. And it does come up every once in a while, I think, like in his book, where he talks about, like walking away from the E Street Band. But I'm glad that he kind of doubles back on it in his autobiography, where he realizes, well, if I didn't do that, would Nelson Mandela have ever gone out of prison? And also would
The answer is no.
right, you know,
Probably.
but also on a smaller level, he says, if I didn't leave the ECU band, Patty never would have joined. So then if Bruce doesn't hook up with Patty, their kids don't exist. Like he brings it back even to that. So, and I've said it to him a few times since too. Like no matter what happened along the way, I love your career. Like
What's
all
the
these.
greatest? Dave Fisher, who produced the movie, he used to say, "You're the most successful rock star. What have you done that hasn't been a home run? Whether it's the streaming show, or just the acting, or just the activism. You did get, you did help create awareness about South Africa, probably more than anybody else. You did probably more than anybody else, help get Mandela freed, get that legislation passed. You did produce these records that are some of the biggest records of all time, or co-produced. You did write some of the greatest songs. You did do the radio, the record label, and on, and satellite radio. So what are you talking about? Everything's a home run. Like
Yeah,
it may
that's
not
right.
be the way you want it, but it's also exactly the way you want it because you don't compromise. So it's amazing. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack that, but it was those CDs. Are those the ones that were out on Razor and Tie?
Yes.
So the guy that ran Razor and Tie, or that owned Razor and Tie, Craig Balsam, is the one of our EPs on the movie.
Oh,
Great guy, huge Stevie fan, and he was the guy that said, "Are you making that film? I want to be involved in that." And he reached out to us, and we were able to work on the film together. So we were able to be at interviews together and so forth, which was really special. And he brought a lot of knowledge and passion. He put those records out because he loved Steve.
right.
You know, so it was a lot of people that really loved Stevie Van Zandt. Chris Stadler, who is the other EP, was a fanatic. You know what I mean? So and I got to go to a show with him and singing along with Stephen Van Zandt songs, and so it was really a labor of people say labor of love, but it really was. That usually connotes that there's not going to be reward. There's tremendous reward in that we got to celebrate this cat at the same time, which is what's so cool is that the book's out. I'm sure that now he's like, yeah, I probably made all the right decisions. Now we got this movie, this book, talking about how everything was like pretty perfect. You
Well,
know,
I'm glad we could convince him that he's had a great career.
it's a phenomenal career. Let me ask you something. Um, I know you've done other books. When did you write your first book, and what are some of I think I know the titles, but just for people that are watching.
So my first book was I guess it was a while ago now. It's about a 70s hard rock band from Scotland that I kind of grew up loving called Nazareth.
Yeah, of course I know
Um,
Nazareth, bro. When you
who
think of
you know,
Nazareth,
so they
I'm 57. You know how many Nazareth T-shirts were near us in South Florida,
right,
which was a big rock place when I was growing up.
right. Well, Canada was a huge market for them. They recorded like three or four of their albums up here, and they would do coast to coast Canadian tours in the 70s. So they got played in the radio or on the radio up here a lot when I was growing up. So that was my first book, and I didn't really know what I was doing. It is a chapter by chapter kind of album guide. I only talked to a few of the guys because I was kind of scared of reaching out to, my heroes. And then so that book's called Rasmus Snaz.
I've seen it online. Yeah,
Um, really proud of the fact that book's actually there's a Brazilian edition translated into Portuguese.
Brazilian people love hard rock, man.
Yeah, that's a big market for them. Nazareth do really well. They've done really well down there for a long time. And later this year, that book is actually getting published in the Soviet Union. It's already been
That's why.
translated into Russian, and I'm really excited about that. When the book came out, I reached out to some Brazilian and Russian publishers, didn't get too far with either of them. After a few years, a Brazilian publisher got a hold of me, and now this Russian couple of guys reached out to me not that long ago, actually. And so that's happening. So that book is kind of has some legs on its own. It's getting out there to different people in different languages. My second book was about Cheap Trick, another great 70s, band that I grew up with.
Isn't it surprising how much Stevie loves Cheap Trick?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it should be surprising. I mean, he's such a student kind of rock and roll, but he probably didn't talk about it too much until more the later years.
Yeah,
by
like
that.
now, whenever Cheap Trick's playing, or they're on Twitter, and I'm like, I didn't figure Stevie for a big Cheap Trick guy, but he is.
Yeah, he puts whenever they have a new single, it seems to be the coolest song in the world that week on his radio station. Um, so I talked to a couple of Cheap Trick guys like Bunny Carlos for that book. I was still a little tentative. That book actually led to really proud of this. The Cheap Trick's Live at Budokan album was added to the Library of Congress as, an important work of art. And they have like radio broadcasts in there and important books and plays and all these different
Yeah, well,
things that
yeah,
are historically important. So music is part of that. So Cheap Trick's Budokan album, that's in the Library of Congress as an important artistic part of American culture. And the library reached out to me to write the essay that accompanies that album in
pretty
there.
dope.
So yeah, that was a great opportunity. I'm really that's somewhere that the book took me that I never could have imagined. And then my third book was about the Canadian group, The Guess Who, with Burton Cummings. And now
Right
with
on.
that book, I did open things up a little bit because I know Burton a bit, talked to him a lot, interviewed some ex-band members, interviewed some like radio guys, and so that got me more comfortable with the interview process and even just the reaching out to people, and being okay with the fact that someone's going to say, who the hell are you, kid? We don't have to, we don't have to talk to you about nothing. So every book kept leading up to me talking to more and more people. Finally, you get to Solidarity Forever, and I think I interviewed like 32 people or 33 maybe, something like that. So at that point, getting really, really, really comfortable. So the Stephen book almost had to be my last book because the building blocks had to happen. If the Stephen book was the first one, it wouldn't be anywhere near as good. The other books are still good, and each one gets better and better. But to me, the Stephen book just kicks it up another notch, takes it to a whole new place because I have so much input from. I mean, I got quotes from Gary U.S. Bonds. I didn't even think I could reach out to him, you
What a
know?
cool guy.
Like that was really crazy for me to get an email back from his daughter saying, "Yeah, Gary's in."
What a cool guy he is. We went to interview him at his house. He has this cool, like, basement that's like finished. He has a hot tub and a jukebox and a bar. It's like coolest basement I've ever been in. Um, and he like laid out a spread for us of food. Just a gentleman, champagne, like just a total gentleman. His wife couldn't have been cooler. His daughter couldn't have been cooler. I also love those Gary Response albums too, and
Oh,
all his
killer.
singles from the '50s, and even his records after.
Yeah.
Back in 40 or back in 50 or back in 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then even the one he did with the American Men that Stevie wrote standing in the line of fire
Yeah,
for.
right.
Love his records. I love Gary. So to see that he was just as cool of a dude as you'd hoped, was another great experience. Everyone I met, Dion, is like floated out of the house. I've never been around such positive energy.
Well,
Guy
one
was
thing
just
that one thing that struck me, and I'm not going to say who this is. We can talk about it off camera, but somebody who Steven and this person do not speak to anymore. They have had a falling out. Exactly what it's about, none of my business. But they just not friends, not coworkers anymore. Um, I still reached out to this person, and the response was, Stevie and I aren't really cool with each other anymore, but I still think his story's important. So I'll talk to you. And I was like I was on eggshells. I was like, I don't know if this guy could, just tell me to F off and I want nothing to do with you or anyone that looks like you and I'm out of here. And for him to say it that way, to say, I'm not really a part of that anymore, but I still believe in the music and I still believe in this story. That was, like this is a person stepping up when they could easily just ignore me, tell me to go to hell. Um, so it's like even the people that don't get along with them, they still have that fondness or that kind of, there's still I was like, there's a deep love in there. I'm not going to push it, but I could feel it because you wouldn't be talking to me if you really. So that was really an eye opener too.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah,
No, that is beautiful. Yeah, it's been so. I feel like I learned a lot about commitment, about sticking to your guns, about going for what you want, about being having a set of. I mean, I hate to put it in vulgar terms, but having a set of balls, really just sticking to what you want to freaking do. Um, and then just I'm always blown away by the art. Like you'd think after like all this time, but that's still what I want to listen to. I was
yeah,
listening to him yesterday and being more moved than ever. Because the more I know the guy, the more moving I find it. Because it's so
right.
hard to really give of yourself. I think sometimes people create a persona, and then that persona is the part that's giving. And it's funny, with Steve has a persona,
Yeah,
but what comes through in that persona is more genuine than people that appear not to have a persona. Do you know what I mean?
right. Well, I
It's
was
weird.
struck, earlier when you're talking about him and Maureen, who I did speak to a little bit for the book. You're talking about Summer of Sorcery, but then the whole career, it's almost like a bookend. The whole career begins in 1982 with Angel Eyes, which he would dedicate that every night to Maureen in 82, 83, 84. So, and I have a demo version of Angel Eyes that's even earlier that he rehearsed with the Jukes. But so to have that kind of love, so it's spanning all these years that now he does this new song, which is this epic, huge thing, starts with just this light acoustic guitar and then builds and builds. You go, man, we're really a part of something here. Like this is really moving.
Oh, it is. I can get choked up. So thank you, my friend, for writing this beautiful book and letting people know. Um, you know, just just sharing all of your knowledge. Do you find that people that love Stevie's music have eclectic taste? Like it's not like a I'm just into like the Jersey Shore sound and I like South Side and John Eddie and Bruce and Steve. I find it's like they like all kinds of like I like progressive rock and calypso and Steve Van Zandt. Like it's weird. Do you find that true or?
Well, I think there's two schools, and the one school is like pure just Jersey, and they're just so hardcore into that. And I get it. It's great music. Men Without Women is probably my top album of all time if I'm really pushed to shove. But, so there's some of that for sure. But if you branch out a little bit, I mean, as soon as he does two reggae songs on Voice of America, and he has on Los Desaparecidos that keyboard solo and percussion, and of course Monty Louis Ellison is on that album too. That started branching it out. And then on Freedom No Compromise, we have Ruben Blades singing. And so you get into that, and he kept expanding, and having these like South African singers on Pretoria, and then having hip hop guys on Sun City. So Stephen can, if you're open to it, Stephen can keep opening your mind to new music that you're not just stuck with like Eddie and the Cruisers, over here. If you're open to it, like I never really listened to much probably reggae before hearing Solidarity and I Am a Patriot. And even that, I grew up in the 70s like a hard rock and a jazz guy. So then to hear bitter fruit and those kind of percussion elements and those kind of rhythms, that's not part of my upbringing. So that expanded my understanding of music. And and again, yeah, like the hip hop guys on Sun City, that kind of does it again. And then you got all like the really cold computer kind of music on Revolution. You go, oh, now we're going this way, and now we can listen to the Dan Reed Network and different, things like that. So I think that Steven, people who are really lifelong fans of Steven, yes, absolutely, would have that kind of a wide range of music. Um, Partially because he opens you up to a lot of that kind of stuff. If you talk to Steve and it's like he wants to just talk about the Stones all the time, and that influence really comes through in a lot of his music. But then you get all this other stuff. And I had asked him because one thing that he added to the E Street or Jersey sound, I said, but on that first album, you've got a percussionist that didn't exist in the Jukes or in the E Street Band or in the Bonds records or on any of those. Where did that come from? And he goes, West Side Story is like my most famous, or my favorite music score of all time. So I always have that Latin thing in my head. On Men Without Women, he just had Monty doing his thing. Opens it up on Voice of America with Los Desaparecidos, and he just kept building on it and showing off that part of his personality because I never would have expected that.
That's a really good point. You made me remember, and I may have told him but Sun City was one of the things that expanded my mind to many different kinds of music. At that point, I thought you only liked rock. I did tell him, I'm like, you made Ruben Blades cool to me. You made uh, uh, not Eddie Palmieri, who I love, but I didn't know he was cool then either. But he's got on there. Uh, what's it, this great conguero that plays on Sun City. Um,
Oh, Ray Barretto?
Barretto. These are my mom's records. These weren't my records. I was like, whatever. Almost like when I first heard, I took Celia Cruz for granted. She's one of my favorite artists of all time. But I took it for granted till I heard her with David Byrne on the Something Wild album. I was like, or in the movie, I'm like, oh, David, Celia's cool? Wow. Of course, now, well, that's a stupid 13-year-old, right? Now I
Yeah,
know
right.
Celia's one of the greatest artists of all time. Um, and I was involved in a small way in a doc on Celia. But anyway, but like say Barretto, then I was like, what? Then that led me into Fania. Mom, can I borrow these albums? And now I'm really because my mom's Cuban, so I mean, and
Right.
I got to tell him that too when that was part of the pitch, like telling him that Los Desaparecidos, my grandma had a son who was disappeared in Cuba during the whole crazy stuff over there. So she would come in my room and she didn't speak English, but she knew who Steve was and she could hear the Spanish lyric. And she was like, what is that song about in Spanish? So his music is like, you know, it reaches beyond what he thinks it may reach, so often. But yeah, when I heard Sun City, all of a sudden, I never heard Gil Scott Heron.
Mm,
I, I, I knew Lou Reed was cool, but in '84 or '86 when
yeah.
I didn't know how cool he was. Okay, the Ramones and on down the line. I mean, it just opened my head up. And then hip hop. Hip hop is okay. All right, let's get into hip hop, which I became a huge hip hop head. But a lot of that, like you said, reggae, whether it's Jimmy Cliff or it opened up my mind for all these different kinds of music too. So that's a great point about how he helps you expand all that.
Well, the Freedom No Compromise album, when you listen to Stephen always says dance on the bottom and rock on top, right? That he does these pre-programmed percussion parts and synthesizer parts, and then he adds like really loud, like Keith Richards style guitar on top of it. Um, I love that sound, the Freedom No Compromise sound. I can't get enough of it.
That album's amazing.
I told him I got a big problem with that album, and I told him I'm not afraid to tell you it's too
It's
short.
it's only 8 songs.
Actually, the funny thing is at only 8 songs, it's actually a little longer than both Voice of America and Without Women because the songs are longer. But yeah, just like the way that he got those programmed drum beats and synthesizers, and that was something that Ben Newberry was really and Zoe were really able to help me um, understand what that was. That they had to pre-program all that stuff beat by beat, and so one thing I wasn't able to put in the book was when I had dinner with Ben Newberry, I said, "Can we talk about that percussion thing again?" So he said they had to make these chips, and each of these chips has a different sound. And, they had to like physically move these little computer chips. And Steven and Ben together would program the fills and, the 2/4 and all the beats. I said, and I didn't think of this while I was writing the book. Like where did those chips come from? Like that I just didn't get to that. So when I had dinner with Ben, I brought it up again. I said, okay, so I understand all this stuff. So you have all these drum beats on these computer chips. And he goes, oh yeah, it took forever, but it's I said, but where do those come from? He goes, oh, you get a drummer in the studio and you just have him, bash away for a few hours. You record it all digitally onto these chips, and then you do whatever you want with them. And it's cheaper than having a session guy in there. I go, well, that's cool. Like, do you remember who did it? Are you sitting down?
I'm sitting down.
Max Weinberg.
Wow.
So technically, Max Weinberg is the drummer on Freedom No Compromise. I'm like, what are you saying to me?
Wow. That's
I would have put
wild.
this in the book for sure. And Ben was just like, I don't know. I thought it was cool. Like,
That's really
dude.
funny, man. Hey, you can probably hear this guy hammering away, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Sorry, man. It's a
Well, that's
construction site out there. So I bet so we should probably wrap it up before it gets louder. But I wanted to just say regarding that, you know, I think about these guys. They're programming those things one by one by one by one by one.
yeah.
Zoe and Ben and Stevie, and so much of like what he does, whether it's like, the mix on of all those snippets, you know, he is he's like a true, like, it's like genius level stuff because he does it. He makes it look so easy. He's up there playing with his band or Bruce or whoever. He's acting on a show. He's doing the different. He makes all that look easy, and then you forget about all the other stuff that he's done that he's not doing right now. And you're like, nobody does all that. Nobody.
Yeah, and that's
And then he
why
does it look makes it look so easy. Like, let's talk about the Stones. It's wild.
yeah, and that's
He
why what
almost
I,
makes it
I
look
was
too
saying about it,
easy.
I never, if there's one or two things he doesn't remember, I'm like, how could you? Like,
You're right, man. No, you're
okay,
right. It's funny you mentioned the Lost Boys album. I gotta talk about this because I always think about this. I remember watching The Sopranos. You were probably like me. As soon as the internet came out, you went and you looked up Steve Van Zandt, Little Steven, and there was nothing. You couldn't find anything.
right,
Eventually, he put up that one website where
yeah,
Born Again Savage was. But even before then, with the essays and everything,
yeah,
but there was nothing forever. Watching The Sopranos, oh my God, is that Steve? So we're in. But then I'm watching, and Gloria Trillo's dancing to "Affection," and
yeah,
I heard that song. I'm like, yo, that sounds like Steve, man. It sounds like the Stones, but it sounds like Steve.
yeah,
Watch the credits, DVR, The Lost Boys. I'm like, nah, that's Steve, man, for sure. Like, did you have that feeling too? Like, there's got to be something there as just a fan watching TV.
I did. So my thing with Sopranos is really weird in that, like, yeah, I love it. Watched every season. Every year when the new season was going to start, I would watch all the existing DVDs from the beginning. So hardcore Sopranos guy. Just love it. Best gangster. It's like Goodfellas spread out over 7 years or something.
Yeah, man.
Love it. Amazing. But then when I was writing the book, like I knew of Affection because then they put that on the second Sopranos soundtrack CD.
Peppers and eggs.
Um, Although they just credit it to the Lost Boys. So again, they're kind of keeping their cards close to their chest. But then when I started rewatching Sopranos, specifically for the book, I'm going to start at the beginning and I'm just going to watch every episode. I'm specifically going to just watch Steven and listen for any mentions of anything that could be kind of about Steven. So at this point, I've watched the entire series of Sopranos like probably 10 times because when I got the complete DVD set, I watched it all again. When I got the complete Blu-ray set, watched it all again. So, but now I'm watching it specifically for the movie. And I told him about this. And it's in the book. There's a scene where Tony Soprano is at Adriana's club and they're in her office and she gives him a drink and she's got a drink and there's music in the background and Tony Soprano goes, "What's this?" And Adriana says, "Oh, it's this band called the Lost Boys. I think Sil owes the money or something." And he didn't even know that. But I didn't. I was like, how did I miss that? Like I've watched the show so many times. They actually talk about the Lost Boys, and the song it's not Affection. I think it's Nobody Loves and Leaves. It could be something else. It's in the book, but So I started picking up all these little things that I didn't know before. Like there's actually quite a bit of his music
Yeah, I didn't
in
know that either
Sopranos.
till I read the book. How many little bits of his music are in the show?
And then he goes on to Lilyhammer and forget it. He's got like Steven, Southside songs, Gary U.S. Bond songs, like all that
And
stuff
then you
in
have
there.
the score, the Interstellar Jazz Messengers, right?
Wow,
Who knew
that was a game changer for me because
this
there's
guy
a
plays jazz too?
well, there's an orchestral version of Out of the Darkness
Oh yeah, I know it.
on that, which blows me away. Out of the Darkness was a really, really big song for me in '84. Like I would watch that music video. I taped it on VHS. I'd watch it like 100 times a day. I was just obsessed, you know. And of course, it's only again writing the book years later that I watch it again with closer eyes and I realized that's not David Rosenthal on keyboards in that video.
It's Ben, right?
It's Ben Newberry.
Yeah, I read that in your book.
But to see in Sopranos really opens up Steven to a whole other world. And I noticed when I saw the movie at the Tribeca Film Festival, I did dig out
Thank you for coming to that, man. You are a
that's my
legend, sir.
ticket.
You're a legend, sir. Ticket looks purple, which is cool.
Yeah, right. Couldn't be any better. But like I always thought that there was a thing like people would kind of joke about like, oh, do people know that the guy in the E Street Band is in Sopranos? And I always thought that was kind of silly. When I was in that theater with you, and it's funny that you mentioned Eddie Brigati because he was sitting right in front of me at that showing, which was very cool. I was with my friend Vince, and like that's Eddie Brigati from the Rascals right there. But when in the movie when they show some of the Stevens kind of famous scenes from Sopranos, there was people in the crowd laughing like crazy, and I was thinking, I don't think these people knew it was the same guy.
I
Like
don't know.
to me, it was always obvious, but man, the cheese in the socks and all those kind of things. I like people were just losing it over those scenes. I thought this is really interesting. I think the movie is going to send either some Sopranos fans back to Steven's music or Steven music, E Street Disciples fans going back to watch the Sopranos.
I do hear that a lot. A lot of people are like, I didn't know that was the same guy from the E Street Band and Little Steven and Sun City. That's the guy from The Sopranos. I'm amazed how many people didn't know that.
A lot of people, when I was working on the book, I work in I manage a record store. So we
I
talk
didn't know
about,
that.
we talk about music like all day long. This is all I do.
I got to get a sticker or a hat or something for that record
Yeah.
store.
So we,
What's it called, if I can ask?
Sunrise Records, it's a chain up here.
Dope.
So
I managed
we,
a record store too.
people would be asking me, like, what are you working on next? And when I tell them a book about Steve Van Zandt, sometimes you get a bit of a dull look on the face. I go, well, the guy from E Street Band. They go, oh yeah, I guess. And then I go, guy from Sopranos. And they go, what? I thought you said it was the guy from the E Street Band. I go, well, yeah, he's also in Sopranos. They go, no, I'm a huge Sopranos fan. I don't know who you're talking about. It's a really weird kind of thing. So that made it even more important. I'm like, okay, there has to be a Sopranos chapter in here, even though aside from affection and some of the little things that we're talking about, Steven's not in there as a musician. There's nothing like that. I know at one point Christopher says that Silvio used to own a club down at the shore in Asbury, which is like a cool little, Easter egg too. But when I was hearing that from people, I'm like, okay, that's it. There has to be a chapter devoted to Steven in Sopranos, just so people are more aware of that aspect of his career. And then, of course, if I'm covering that, then there has to be a Lilyhammer chapter. So the book kind of takes a little bit of a side uh, turn with those two things, but yeah, the way that he straddles those worlds is really interesting. I was backstage at a Springsteen concert in San Jose on the Rising tour, and I was there to see Steve. And almost everyone else that was backstage was all radio guys because it was like the first or second year of the Underground Garage. So, usually when you're backstage with Steven, it's other record store guys or record label people and a couple of fans and that kind of thing. On this one specific show in San Jose, all local radio guys who'd like flown in from San Francisco and different places to talk to him about his station, and they were, I guess, affiliates and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this scene is changing because usually it's just music kind of nerds and stuff hanging around. Like it's all like radio people. So now he's in that world.
And he just does it effortlessly, man.
Yeah.
Effortlessly. This is, guy's a real example.
Well,
Thank,
we were both inspired by him at the age of 16,
yeah, man.
and we're still inspired by him, and here we are.
This has been really cool, man. Thank you.
Thank you. This is great.
Solidarity forever.